Hello and welcome to the Full FX Unfiltered. My name is Colin Lambert. I'm publisher of the Full FX, and this edition is in association with CLS Group. And I'm delighted to be joined by Lisa Danino-Lewis, an old friend. Lisa, nice to see you, Chief Growth Officer at CLS. And we are going to talk, surprise, surprise, we're going to kick off with T+1, which actually is still quite a big issue in terms of the market debate forum. CLS recently undertook a big feedback and consultation program. Can you give us sort of an insight into what the analysis of that was?
Absolutely, Colin. So you're rightly saying T+1 is still the focus, and it's something that we're still talking about today. We put out a press release a couple of weeks ago around T+1, and was really the conclusion on the analysis that we did. So we've done some internal analysis looking at what CLS could specifically do to support the market, particularly the buy side. From that, we sent out, and this was late last year, a questionnaire to all of our members. And just, again, to remind everyone that CLS can only support what our members can support. So that's super important that we got the feedback from the members to see what we were able to do around our specific timelines. So midnight CET is the initial pay-in schedule where we do the multilateral net. We then go through the liquidity tool, the in-out swap process, shortly thereafter, about half an hour thereafter. And then 6:30 CET is our rescind deadline. And then at 7 o'clock, we start the settlement process.
And that's 6:30 after the next morning?
Yeah, that's on day of settlement. So we were looking at whether we could move that midnight initial pay-in schedule 30, 60, 90 minutes. And we got all the analysis back. We spent some time at the beginning of this year doing a deeper dive with a good number of our top tier members to understand really when we look at it, the members look similar, but their responses were very different. So we were really trying to get under the skin and see why they were different and what their complexities were. Basically, in a nutshell, when we looked at all the analysis, it came through that at least, it was just over 40% of our members would need to do development work to support this. Some of them as much as a year. There was one of our top tier members who said it would take them a year to do the technology development that was required. And that 40% account for 50% of our average daily volume. So that's obviously half of 6.5 trillion. So that in itself means that it's not an easy thing to do. We always were very, I think, upfront with the market that we would never have anything done in time for May.
And I think that was widely accepted, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the back of this analysis, it's sort of, we've done a sort of another take and gone, actually, well, it's going to be at least a year for a member to put that in place. Plus, we need to do any regulatory approval process. So, we're talking years away as opposed to, a few months. So what we've, as we've said to the market, we're going to see what happens through the May date. We're going to analyse the data we see to make sure that it's in line with our beliefs. And from our outreach to the buy-side community, we think that of the 1% that we estimated could be affected, probably it's going to be less than 0.5% of that, or 0.5%.
So that's basically shot down all of my analysis saying I think its numbers a bit low.
Well, I hope you're wrong.
Happens. It happens. I've been wrong before.
We're going to take temperature checks, obviously, through the end of May. We've agreed to go back to the market with our analysis in June and September as 2 data points.
And actually, that's quite important, isn't it? Because it's an observation that I think is being made more and more, is that it's not just pre and post T+1, it is actually an evolutionary process, and you will be learning along the way as an industry, not just as an organisation in your case.
Yeah, I mean, I think even September, there will still be some organisations that are making adjustments. One of the things, though, that I think has come through from all this discussion is that clear delineation now between the CLS midnight deadline and custodian cut-off line at the times, because they were a little bit blurred before, and a lot of the market thought they were one and the same. The other thing that we've highlighted in the recent communication was that whilst we won't move the initial pay-in schedule, which is the multilateral netting process, there is nothing that precludes our members inputting and submitting transactions up to 6:30 a.m. CET on the day of value, so half an hour before settlement.
Right.
Now, whether they choose to do that is up to each individual member, and obviously if they're supporting a client, between their relationship with the client. But that facility is there.
Yeah.
So without a wholesale change to the operations of CLS and potentially putting the 99% plus in jeopardy, those trades can still go into the system, should the member support that.
I mean, that sounds to me like a very good argument for why the decision was we're not going to change it at this time. And I think we should stress at this time.
Absolutely.
Again, going back to that evolutionary process. What kind of went into the decision making behind that? Can you give us some insight into that? Is you had the data, which you've just quoted there, but was it really just a question of actually, yes, it is a straight numbers game, 99% versus 1%?
I don't think it was necessarily on the percentage. It was more around our members being able to support it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We can't do anything without our member support. We can't do it for, we've got 74 members, we can't do it for 50 and not 24 or the other way around. So it really was, once we did that deeper dive, once we looked at the numbers and it said 40% need development, they account for 50% of the overall volume, that could be up to a year. It didn't stack up to do anything in a hurry. Again, given also the need for further analysis and regulatory approval should we, move down that road. But I think, as you said, we've got to see how we progress through May and what happens. And if the impact is obviously in line with our thinking, then it's a small amount and we think the market will adapt. If there are any sort of big deviations from that, then obviously we need to reassess. But it will still take time. We can't solve it. Yeah. But I think emphasising that 630 point is important because there is an avenue in, again, but it's down to the member side.
And I guess also, I mean, we should probably also make the point that actually there are other avenues they can go down to actually mitigate the risk. If they can't actually meet the deadlines and the 630 doesn't work for them, there are other actually ways they can still get in the safe settlement, for want of a better word.
Yeah, I guess so. Not necessarily through CLS, obviously, if you miss our deadlines.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of actually what they can do with CLS if they can't hit the deadline. Those market participants that can't actually say, like, I'm sorry, it could be that half or 1%.
So if it goes to T0, you mean?
Yeah, that sort of thing, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, look, T0, absolutely, we can't settle that in CLS settlement, but we have other tools that help facilitate. And I think one of the key things around that T0 date is, and this has come out not just on the FX side, but the security side, is automating your processes, making them as efficient as possible for T1 so that you can capture those trades, that information, execute when you can, and if there are exceptions, manage it. So from a CLS perspective, CLSNet is the tool that we use for T0. And actually, interestingly, today, around 15 to 20% of the flow that goes through that platform is T0 from the current participants. So on average, the average daily value that's going through is just over 150 billion. We had a peak day in March of over 450. Yeah. So there's quite a lot that's already going through.
And that is actually quite good growth, isn't it? Because I remember, I think it was last year, we were talking about you actually going over 100 billion.
Yeah, no, it's getting a lot of traction. We've got our first buy-side client in testing now, so hopefully we'll have more news of that second half of the year. But yeah, it's so again, from a T0 perspective, that helps you automate that process. Your other option is if you're not settling with your custodian, you've got gross or bilateral net settlement. So obviously net settlement is more efficient.
Yes, yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? We want to actually retain that ability to net settle.
If you can. If you've got the flows, it makes sense.
Yeah. So, end of May comes, everything's brilliant. And then everyone suddenly starts talking about the UK and the EU.
They're talking about it now. We're not waiting for May.
I know, yes, yeah. But I mean, is that actually the next looming challenge on the horizon?
So it's definitely, obviously, being focused on. It's a much smaller situation from a CLS perspective. Yep. With the US, it was less than 1%. Europe is 0.4%. Yep. The UK is 0.1%. Okay. So the numbers are much, much smaller. Yep. The time zone is much more aligned with our own, even the midnight CET deadline. So there are still going to be challenges, particularly for the Asian participants. But it's not going to be anything like the experience that we've had
Yeah.
in the US. So we're very actively involved with the UK Accelerated Task Force on that side, and also with the EU working groups as well, just to make sure that we've thought through everything.
And I guess also you have the advantage of saying there will be lessons that can be taken from the US transition.
Totally. We've learnt a lot. I think the whole market's learnt a lot from this.
I certainly have, about something I never actually knew. So, I mean, I guess just to conclude on the T+1, because I do want to ask about one other thing as well. On the T+1, if we can summarise CLS's message to the industry about the end of May, about T+1, what would it be?
Gosh. Well, I think we need to see what the impact really is.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, we will be monitoring the impact on settlement.
Yeah.
We'll also be looking at, through our volume data, looking at the impact of liquidity, because that's another factor executing in the New York close, whether we see any differences there. I think automation is key going into this. Again, speak to your bank, speak to your custodians, the custodian deadlines. We've heard some really positive news from some of the custodians that they are looking to move their cut-off times, and I think that's helpful because it brings them more in line with the CLS deadlines. So I think they're the key points. Yeah,
okay. So in spite of the amounts being relatively small, I love the fact we're 40 billion. It's fine. It shows how big we are, I suppose, as an industry. But there's an irony to me that at the very time when we are pushing for more PVP settlement, a regulation in another market is actually potentially reducing that down. But what I wanted to ask you about is in 2019 the BIS kicked off a lot of introspection, as we say, in the industry. And then the central banks have taken it on with initiatives around increasing the use of PVP. Is that still ongoing? I mean, we seem to have been... T+1 is an urgent matter, I get that, but are we still actually underlyingly looking at more PVP and what's happening in that space?
Yeah, I think there's still momentum behind that. I mean, certainly from a member perspective, we're seeing a bigger take-up of our cross-currency swap service, which allows those FX-related flows to come into the main service and, again, take advantage of the multilateral netting process. So that grew. Last year, we had a number of signings. We've just actually had another one come in today. So we're still seeing the impetus from our members where they're not settling cross-currency through PVP to push that. And again, the message is it's on the back of a regulatory ask. So we're definitely seeing that momentum still going through. From a CLS perspective, we're still out there educating the market. We've got the core of the market in, but there's a long tail. So we spend a lot of time working with our members and, the asset manager, corporate banking community, just to advise on what can be done. Our new growth at CLS, I think Q1 was still 78 billion average daily value. So that's still a good number coming in. I mean, it's off the peaks that we've seen, but there's still flow coming through. So we are still seeing a take-up of PVP.
Yeah, so momentum is still there.
Still there.
And I guess actually once we get past T+1, the message will be reiterated again. You'll probably hear more from central banks saying, okay, well, we've got over that hurdle. Don't forget the end goal here.
Well, I think the code is being reviewed this year, and that was also, I think the BIS raised that in their comments of, looking at settlement risk again. Yeah. So obviously we're aware that there is still a rising settlement risk for currencies outside of CLS. Again, CNH we know is getting bigger and bigger. From the CLS net perspective, the flows we see, 50% of that is CNH, so we are seeing that coming through. So, there's still that need to look at what can be done in emerging markets. And I know there's, ourselves and others are looking at trying to help the market there.
I guess it's an inevitable evolution, isn't it? If you look back over the history of the foreign exchange market, and sadly our history is quite long now. Mine
Speak
longer.
For yourself.
I was going to say mine longer, but I mean, it is a natural evolution from developed markets into emerging markets,
Absolutely.
Isn't it? Yeah. Lisa, thank you so much for the update, because actually it's always insightful to hear from CLS, because you are at the centre of this, and frankly at the centre of the industry, aren't you? So great to talk to you again. Thanks very much for your time, and hopefully we can do this again soon. And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back again soon.
Thanks, Colin.